Welcome to Prophecy Countdown with author and pastor Kenneth Baer. Join us every week for the latest updates on what the Bible has to say about the events, the characters, and prophetic signs of the return of Jesus Christ and His coming kingdom. Make sure you not only subscribe, but like your favorite episodes and share it with your friends. Now, on with the broadcast.
Welcome today to our podcast called Prophecy Countdown. I'm Pastor Ken with Faith Dialogue. We typically provide 2 updates each week to our video and audio channels called Prophecy Countdown. Now, today we're doing something a little different, and I'm calling this update a priest and a pastor, because this week I was the guest on a podcast hosted by a good friend of mine, a Catholic priest named Patrick Baikauskas. He lives in St. Louis as a teacher there at the seminary. Pat and I have been good friends for over 50 years. We were fraternity brothers together, Sigma Nus. Now, if that means if you were a Sigma Nu, you're always a Sigma Nu. When we attended Bradley University, along with my wife. Now, interestingly, and likely no one would have seen this coming 50 years ago, Patrick and I both felt called to the ministry about 23 years ago. Pat has a podcast called Frank Friar Fridays. You can pick it up on your local podcast, Frank Friar Fridays, weekly reflections from a Dominican friar. And he had me on this last Friday, and I thought what would be fun is to pick up some of that podcast on my channel as well. Pat and I were recently at a gathering of some school chums, some fraternity brothers, and thought it would be fun to get together on the air as well. So Pat was interested in my take on Israel at war, and you'll see we have a good number of conversations on that topic and a number of related faith-filled topics. So here we go with that podcast that aired on Friday. And Pat, I know that as a priest, you've spent a lot of time at the bedside in hospice and, with your parishioners. And as I have, in fact, our last ministry was inside of a senior facility. Average age of our congregation was around 85. So we had the privilege of spending a lot of that last moments with people. Yeah. And unless you've been a part of it, you don't understand it, but it's a privilege. It is. It's really a privilege to be there. The ministry changes from the person that's ill and on the last stages of their earthly existence, and instead you start ministering to their family, to their children and grandchildren, and you get to bring the gospel to them, and you get to give them an opportunity to understand that there is an opportunity and hope in this life, and that hope is in Jesus.
Yeah. When my very first ministry was in a hospice, the hospice of St. John of Jerusalem in Denver, Colorado. And, it wasn't even really that long ago. It was when I just started. It was in 2001, 2002. So 20 years ago? Yeah. But even 20 years ago, there was no in-home hospice care. All the hospice care that was being done back then was freestanding hospices. Yeah. And that was my first ministry. I was going into hospice, accompanying people on their last days of life. Our average length of stay in the hospice was 2 weeks. Yeah. And I was so anxious about I wasn't ordained yet. I hadn't had any theological training really per se, but it's all about accompaniment. It's all about being with them. It's nothing that I have to do. You let the Holy Spirit work through you. And people are just so often afraid of feeling alone, and they just want somebody with them. Yeah, usually
there's not questions that come up that are difficult to answer. It's typically the presence that's needed.
Yeah. I remember walking in this woman's room one day. Of course, a lot of my listeners know what I look like. Most of the time I have a white habit on. I have one on right now. And I walked in and she lit up. She said, "Are you an angel?" And I said, "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm just a chaplain here." And she was clearly disappointed. She thought she had made it to heaven.
It's the angel of death.
Yeah. So Ken, even though he's retired, he's still involved in ministry via electronic means. He has a podcast as well. Prophecy Countdown.
Yeah. Just like you, we find that there's all kinds of ways to minister to people. We started, COVID really changed the ministry. And so I'm sure you found it changed in the Catholic churches as well.
Oh,
Our
yeah,
church, of
absolutely.
course, embraced, video and audio ministry. We were on, our Sunday services premiered on YouTube, and that started the ball rolling. But we found that there was a number of people that we were ministering to online, and so we've continued that. We've continued that over the last few months, and Prophecy Countdown is kind of coming from my I guess my ministry now, which is talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ and what the Bible has to say about that time. And as you can imagine, with what's going on in Israel, it's become a hot topic.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that because, of course, I don't remember when's the last time we saw each other. It's been quite a while. It's been too long, but we were
Well, actually,
going back.
Chicago at Joey's.
Yeah, at Joey's. Yeah. Oh, right, 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 right. Um, what I was, in talking to you, yeah, what am I thinking? Of course, we saw you at Joey's. The uh, experience that you've been having with the prophecy countdown,
Yeah.
in light now of the violence in the Gaza Strip. How is it? How have people been responding to you, and what questions have come up for you and among those to whom you're ministering?
Yeah, it's a great question, Patrick. One of the first questions is this something that the Bible foretells? And the obvious answer to that is Jesus said, "You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars." But then he says, "Let not your heart be troubled." No, those things happen. I mean, it's difficult to say that this war is much different than any other war, but at the same time, it's Israel. It's Israel,
Mhm.
and for thousands of years we've had prophecies in the Old Testament that God would regather his people from all the countries and bring him into the land of Israel, and people said, well, how could that happen? How could that happen? But May 14th, 1948, it happened, and the nation was
Mhm.
born. And I think that kind of is a sign to a lot of people. You don't have to be a dispensationalist. You don't have to believe in God's promised people and a plan for them at the end of the age. You don't have to take the Bible literally to all of us understand that that's something that hasn't happened before. That's something very, very special. So we know that God's behind everything that happens. God's sovereign. So that's kind of where the questions begin. What does the Bible have to say about what's going on in Israel? And is there a plan? Is this kind of fit into some kind of end time scenario?
Yeah. The thing that I always um, felt that is underlying in these questions, and in all of these sort of apocalyptic movies that you see in the depictions of what the end times might look like, is this real fear.
Yeah.
And if heaven is what we think heaven is, and I talked about it last week in my podcast, should there be some more positive slant to these questions that people have about the end times, about where we are ultimately all destined to?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great point. And it's one of the things I try to always include when I talk about prophecy is I say, now remember the Apostle Paul, who talked about the end times more than anywhere else in the New Testament. He called it the blessed hope. It's something to encourage each other, which means that, as you talked about in your prophecy in your podcast last week on a glimpse of heaven using the banquet, it's something that we've been invited to. This is something that we need to
Mhm.
look forward to. It's an honor, and there's an opportunity for us to embrace what God has in store for us, and there's a lot of hope there. So that's one of the things we want to do, and that's one of the things I like about prophecy is that prophecy takes us to the Bible, and it includes the prophecies even of the first coming of Jesus Christ. and
Mhm.
and when we realize that all of those prophecies of Jesus coming on a colt into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and being born of a virgin and being born in Bethlehem, those were all fulfilled. Well, there's almost 3 times as many prophecies on the second coming, and it should give us hope that God's in control. Sometimes we look at the world and we don't think anybody's in charge, but God's definitely still on the throne.
Yeah. How do you respond to the people? Of course, it's um, you were raised Catholic, weren't
Yes.
you?
Yep.
So I have
Yep.
the
Yep.
recollection of
I
that,
love
right?
that background. Yeah. My mom and dad stayed Catholic, and I did my mom's memorial service, but my
Yeah,
mom
yeah,
considered herself Catholic until she died. And
yeah,
that was a proud legacy for me.
yeah. Absolutely, that's great to hear. Well, I don't think it's different in the Protestant tradition that we have this, the, sort of a whole wing of theology called theodicy. Why
Right.
does why do bad things
Uh,
happen to good people? And I've been having this question come up in conversations that I've had with some of the students here, in trying to sort that out. How is it that these um, horrific things that we see happening in the Middle East, how do we make sense of that?
yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
make sense of it, that we have a God that loves us so much, and still we see these tragedies occur over faith? That's, when you come down to it, all these things that we see that are occurring right now in the Middle East are involving the sons and daughters of Abraham.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Children
that's been the spoiler, I think, through the ages. When people have difficulty in their lives, it doesn't even have to be bombings and murders, but just some difficulty in their life, and they start
Mhm,
losing faith and confidence in a God, and they kind of wonder, why would God permit that? Through the Holocaust, there were 6 million Jews that were killed, and it wasn't just those 6 million; it was the rest of the Jews. The vast majority of them lost their faith. They just lost their faith. Even when Israel was founded in 1948, David Ben Gurion and Moshe Dayan and some of these leaders that the patriarchs of the modern day nation of Israel, um, they were Jewish, but at the same time they were agnostic or atheist. They
mhm.
they had
I didn't
lost
know
they had
that.
lost their faith. They had lost their faith.
Uh,
Even today, and this is one of the scriptures I share, is that Ezekiel chapter 30, and I don't want to quote a lot of scripture, but in Ezekiel chapter
yeah.
36, it's one of the prophecies where God says, I'll take you from among the nations and gather you in all of the countries and bring you into the land. And then it says this, it says, I will take you from among the nations, gather you with your countries, and I will put a new heart and a new spirit
Mm,
within you. I'll take your
that
heart of
stony
stone and
heart.
replace it with a stone of flesh. Well, here's the thing. That hasn't happened yet. The
Mhm,
people in Israel, the Palestinians as well as the Jews, they still need Jesus. That hasn't happened. So we might, even if you believe in the fulfillment of prophecy and the regathering of the nations, or regathering of Israel, that hasn't happened yet. And see, that's the thing, is that bad things do happen to people. I mean, all of us have suffered some kind of tragedy. All of us have had prayers that haven't been answered, or at least we don't think they've been
yeah.
answered. But our hope is not in this world. you know
Mhm,
it's the one of, I can't remember who it was, I think it was David Jeremiah or something. I can't remember who it was, one of the guys I like to listen to on TV. And he said one of the things that people have to understand is that people that have everything going for them, and it seems like everything's going great for them, but they don't know God, is that you have to understand that's the best it's ever going to be for them.
mhm.
That's the best it's going to be for them. But for those of us that know Jesus Christ, this is the worst it's going to be,
Yeah.
because everything that's promised to us is amazing. As you were talking about on your podcast last week, the
Mhm,
new heaven and the new earth. I mean, it's glorious and it's eternal. And that's the hope that we have, is
yeah.
this next life.
Yeah. I have just had two people that I've become close to here in St. Louis die within the last 10 days.
Oh, dear
I'm
Lord.
not I'm not presiding at the funeral on Saturday, but I'm going to celebrate it, and I did celebrate the other funeral. So it's Terry Meehan and and Ginny Hertman. And I've been it's been a great blessing to accompany them in these last, and they actually know each other, um, but but not like it's best friends. But
Yeah.
it's a small town city. St. Louis is, for a city, it's really a small town, especially in the Catholic world. And I've been very blessed to accompany them. And with both of them, and it's the same thing I saw in hospices as well, that although there with both of them, there was maybe a lot of anxiety a couple months ago. When it got down to the last weeks and then days, there was a great peace
Yeah.
that settled on them. And as hard as it is for us to say goodbye, and I don't want to be trite about it, because we always say, well, they're in a better place. Well, they are, but it's hard for us to accept that as the people that have to say goodbye.
Yeah.
We want to hold on to them. We want them to be with us.
Yeah. No, you're right. The
And
Apostle Paul said, we weep, but we don't weep like those that have no hope. So it's a different discomfort we have. It's a different sorrow that we experience when we lose a loved one, especially when we know that they're going to be in the arms of the Lord.
yeah. Well, and you brought up another point that is so prevalent in my own ministry, is that when people come to the sacrament of reconciliation with me, and they'll confess jealousy or envy over what someone else has, and they'll see somebody very successful and a great job and a beautiful family and maybe a big house and a boat and whatever,
Yeah.
however we in a very materialistic way might look at them and be envious and jealous. I said, but only God can see into our hearts. We have no idea what other challenges that they may be having. Maybe they don't, but
Yeah.
still, those are not the things that we use to measure. Well, we do. It's something that we need to be careful about, though. Is that really what we do in measuring how we're experiencing the happiness and joy that God desires for each of us?
Yeah, exactly. We this last Mega Millions or Powerball, whatever it was. I think last week
Almost
it got
2
up to like
billion.
$1.7 billion.
Yeah,
And whoever won it, I pray for them, because
yeah.
that's going to ruin your life. In fact,
Hmm.
the surveys have shown that typically lottery winners, their lives are ruined. They can't handle that kind of wealth. They immediately turn to material things, and it splits family. And it's just, oh my goodness, I'd rather do without it, and
Yeah,
have the peace of a simple life, rather than having all that exposure and all of that. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. It isn't the money itself, but people start loving that, and it's not good. It's not good for you.
yeah. What did you? I don't want you to pit you against your fellow ministers in the Protestant world, but there is there's a sort of a contingent out there. Maybe that's the best way to put it. That preach this gospel of prosperity.
Yes. Yeah.
And how often is it something that you would encounter in your own ministry? And how do you address that challenge when you hear you see the real popularity of some of these ministers in preaching a gospel that's,
Yeah.
well, I'll leave it at that.
Full of prosperity. Well, I think there's two things that we try to recognize. Number one, Paul talked about, some preach the gospel, out of vain and for their own good. But then Paul says, but I still rejoice that the gospel is being preached. So the first thing is, when it comes to somebody that's accused of being a prosperity preacher, they're put in that category, even they raise their hand and agree to it, is that I'm at least going to rejoice to the fact that they talk about Jesus and understand what it means to be a Christian, and understand that Jesus is the way. He said he was the way. He said he was the Son of God. He died on the cross for their sins. So to that extent, I appreciate it. And then at the same time, when you identify that it's giving in order to gain, because that's typically what prosperity preaching is. Prosperity preaching is all about, well, the more I give to your ministry, put money in the basket or give to your ministry, the more I gain. Well, we never give to get. I mean, giving
Mhm.
is out of the heart, and all we're doing is returning what rightfully belongs to God anyway. So it's just one of the many false doctrines that
Mhm.
happens in churches. I mean, that's why we've got a church in every corner, right? Because somebody's got a different
Yeah.
idea about something, whatever it is, how you do baptisms, or how you do communion, or whether you call them priests or pastors, or whether women are allowed to minister or sit in the back. We've all got our own slant, and their slant happens to be this give to get. And
Yeah.
it's not good, but it's probably no worse than some of the other false teachings that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Well, it came up in a couple of conversations I had last week. I was in Denver, and it's a big event that we've been having for years to raise money for our novitiate, the place where we
Yeah.
men begin their journey of religious formation, and it is in Denver. And the whole purpose was for it to of this foundation was to raise money to build this novitiate, and thanks be to God, it's been built. So it was kind of the swan song for this foundation, and there were some very, very wealthy people that were part of that, and they were one of them was talking to me, and she's she's very rich, and I'm
Yeah.
not going to mention her name because it's a very well-known name nationally, and a lovely woman, and a really faithful woman, and she is talking about, you know is it bad to be rich? And I said, well, there's, she brings up the rich young man. I said, well, the thing is that what kind of relationship did he have with his wealth? That was the issue. Because when you look at Zacchaeus, who we know was a rich man by
Right.
the way that he dressed and in his work, but he had a different relationship
Yeah. Yeah.
with his wealth. So I, ask anybody, is what is your own relationship with what you have? Because that's what our message is, and you just stated it as well. We're all stewards of the things that we have. We're not supposed to hoard them. That's a sin.
Right.
We're supposed to recognize that everything that we've received is a gift from God, and then how do we
Yeah. No, you're
live
exactly
that
right.
out?
You started off this whole podcast with a prayer about with Palestine and with Israel, and we have to understand as Americans, it's difficult not to consider us all rich. We are definitely in
Mhm.
whether it's top 1% or 2%. I mean, most people have cars and TVs and cell phones, and I don't know about you, but I've never missed a meal. And
Yeah, yeah,
I wouldn't consider
yeah.
myself rich, but I think when you take a look at it from a world perspective, we are. And if we
Mhm.
recognize that, that means there's a responsibility that we have to make sure that we are generous on every occasion. So yeah, but I do think I think there is a bigger obligation. I think people that really have a lot of money, I think it's challenging for them to try to understand what they're going to do with it. I mean, just think about, let's just say we have children and we have a huge amount of wealth. What are we going to do for our children? Do you realize that second generation? I mean, that's not good for them
Mhm.
to inherit that kind of wealth. There's a number of very wealthy people that have decided to leave very little to their children
Yeah,
because they don't want to spoil them. They don't want to put them in that category that they have everything they want and they can kind of rule over others.
yeah,
So it is a challenge. It is a challenge.
yeah, it is. Well, Ken, it's been great chatting with you today. Let's do it
I
again.
think so. I think so too. Carol, my wife, as you mentioned, my lovely wife, and she's just as much a friend of yours as I am. I mean, she
Yeah,
loved all of my fraternity brothers, and we all knew each other so well,
yeah,
brothers and sisters. But she said, you and Patrick ought to get together and redo that priest and pastor podcast. I will do one together.
I like it.
And I
Tell
said, well,
Carol.
yeah, I'll tell Carol. I said, well, we'll see how this one goes, but
Yeah,
it would
yeah,
be fun. It would be fun. It's just a
it-
little bit more theological, but I think we could pull it
yeah.
off, because what I hear your heart is that, my goodness, in fact, our statement of faith on our website is the Nicene Creed. And
Mhm.
we intentionally do that because
Right.
the Nicene Creed is 1,700 years old. And it
Yeah.
talks, and 2/3 of it is about Jesus. And we don't
Mhm.
need to separate
Right.
based on small doctrinal issues.
Right.
I was serious when I mentioned about, I love my Catholic background. It was
Yeah.
a great background. I went to Catholic school. Those nuns taught me so much about Jesus, and yeah, I got hit by a couple flying erasers a few times, but it was good for me.
Yeah.
It was good for me. So that was a
Well,
great foundation for me.
yeah. Well, Ken too, he no longer teaches here, but when I had instructor where I am now working is where I studied theology at Aquinas Institute of Theology.
Yeah.
And one of my theology teachers is now the president of our school up in River Forest, Fenwick High School.
Oh, I know
Really
that school. Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember when he's teaching theology, he when you mentioned the Nicene Creed, he said, as we have to embrace all of that. That's the real core of everything.
Yeah.
And if we can agree on that creed, then the other stuff we can work out.
Absolutely.
If
Yeah.
we start from there, then we're on pretty good foundation. to go
Absolutely.
forward from there.
Absolutely.
So, well, Ken, God bless you. Great talking with
Thank you,
you. And I
Patrick.
would love to continue the conversation. Give
Yeah,
my
we'll
best to
we'll
Carol.
definitely do it again.
Okay. Take care.
God bless.
Nearly every day, it's common to see, read, or hear something about the end of the world, the apocalypse, or end times. Author and pastor Kenneth Baer's The Apocalypse and Coming Kingdom zooms in and breaks down biblical prophecy as it relates to Jesus' imminent return and the coming 7-year period, including the Great Tribulation. Available in both paperback and Kindle versions. Get your copy on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble and select Christian bookstores. The title again is The Apocalypse and Coming Kingdom. You can also find it listed by author Kenneth Baer. Get your copy today. Thank you for joining us on Prophecy Countdown with Pastor Ken Baer. Don't leave without first sharing the latest episode with your friends. Be sure to join us again for the latest updates on Prophecy Countdown.